Welcome to Oh God, What Now, the politics podcast that would find you and love you in any universe, even if you had hot dogs for fingers. I'm Alex Andreou. On today's show, Inaction Man sets out his plan of action. The King's speech is on its way and is full of anti-green policies that Charlie is sure to love. Plus, Trump is on the stand, Mike Pence is on his way out, Ron DeSantis is on his high heels, and Joe Biden just dodders on. With 1 year to go, we start off down the road to next year's presidential election. Let's meet the panel. First up, it's columnist and author of Escape, How a Generation Shaped, Destroyed and Survived the Internet, Marie Leconte. Welcome.
Thank you.
Marie, on Monday, Katie Hopkins and Tommy Robinson were reinstated to Twitter. How is Musk's digital town square looking nowadays?
It's actually brilliant. We're all having a lovely time. And as a personal close friend of both Katie Hopkins and Tommy Robinson, I'm just really... So I thought I'd change it up because I think, every time I come on this podcast, the host asks me, so Twitter, Marie, it's gone even worse. Explain. I just got tired of being like, yes, it's awful. It used to be great and now it's terrible because all the fascists are there and Elon Musk is the most annoying man to ever live. So no, this time I'm going to be like, no, I think it's actually good. I am just a big fan of fascism. And it's specifically, I think, when it happens on the website where I get my news, like that's really where I want them.
That's where you want?
Yeah. Next, where else? So, but yeah, on a brief, serious note, it has been quite interesting, actually, how, because I went on to Blue Sky quite early on. And I would say the last few weeks that it's kind of changed massively. And lots of people have joined, but also lots of people have actually started using it. Yeah. So I do think that actually Twitter is kind of disintegrating even quicker than I thought it would. And people are now very much at the stage of, I think, jumping onto the lifeboats. I think they'd been looking at the lifeboats for a while with increased concern. And now they're actively sort of walking over each other to scramble onto the lifeboat. So no, it's just appalling, isn't it? There's nothing else to say really about specifically Hopkins and Robinson kind of being reinstated. It is just dreadful. And I think, will Twitter even still exist by this time next year? In a form that's in any way recognisable? I'm not sure. Yeah.
The only thing to say is that now Katie Hopkins, with her blue tick, her fascism is monetised. That's a development since last time she was on.
Eat, Yeah.
So she'll get paid per click for being outrageous. Next up, journalist, author and extremely snazzy dresser, Seth Tevo. Hello, Seth.
Hello. I like to remember Jeremy Thorpe's advice to Liberal Party candidates in the 70s, which was to dress to the right and talk to the left.
I see. Seth, the COVID inquiry had quite a big week last week. What's coming up this week?
Well, we're at the tail end of covering the scientists, the civil servants, but... just as this is going out on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at Mark Sedwill, the first of, the new phase which we'll be entering, because we'll have Priti Patel on later this week. And after about a week or so's break, when they come back on, I think it's the 20th, that's when you move to the next phase. And I think it was you who actually pointed out earlier this week that they seem to be following this pattern from the previous phase of the inquiry, which is having done the civil servants, having done the scientists, they then move to the politicians.
Yeah.
And,
the last of the batting order.
Well, it's very helpful to frame it firstly around facts from the experts, and then you can ask more meaningful questions when we get the Boris Johnsons.
That's really interesting. Our guest this week is co-director of the Centre on US Politics at UCL, Julie Norman. Hello, Julie. So thrilled to be in the same room as you, because we have a long history of remote recordings.
We do, our virtual relationship.
Antony Blinken has had a very busy few days speaking to every power broker in the Middle East willing to speak to him about the Israel-Hamas war, with not very much to show for it.
It's true. I think it's easy to look at his trip and see that, he came out empty-handed or see it that way. With that said, I think this is still necessary for him to continue this. It's whether like it or not, the U.S. is probably the actor with the most leverage with many other states in the region. And for short term, this is going to be huge for getting any kind of humanitarian pause, for negotiating on hostages. Midterm, it's crucial for not having this conflict spread even further. And long term, it's really important for trying to identify an end game for Gaza. And the U.S. is going to be one of the crucial voices in all of that.
So it's basically the aphorism about diplomacy that it's 364 days of failure followed by one day of success.
Something like that. I mean, I feel like this is going to be a very long slog, and the U.S. Is in a difficult spot, I think, right now. They're trying to thread a very difficult needle where it's going to be seen as too little, too late by most in the region and probably too much by Israel, but they're trying to walk that line right now.
And it's vital not to give up on that process,
Indeed.
basically. Tuesday will see the very first state opening of Parliament in the reign of King Charles III. This will be Charlie's first King's speech since his coronation last year, although he did read the last one on behalf of his mater. Prime Minister Sunak has vowed to put the brakes on climate-saving policies, and the government's legislative programme will include granting new licences for North Sea drilling and more pro-carb promises. All eyes on lifelong environmentalist Charles. But is announcing your long-term ambitions when everyone thinks you have just months to go as a government just a futile act of posturing? Marie, Sunak's first year was all about steadying the ship. So he basically gets one legislative session to make his mark. What we know so far of the programme that will be announced seems precariously perched between short-term things I am doing for electoral advantage and long-term things I will probably never get to do. Do you have some sympathy for him? Is it a pretty impossible position?
I don't know, yes and no. So I think the odd thing is that, and it's everyone in Westminster, but we forget the Conservatives have a very large majority at the moment in the Commons. There's not been that big a majority in government for a very long time. So if he just wanted to force through some stuff, he could. But again, I think it's not just Rishi or Number 10. Everyone seems to forget that there's a very odd thing, I think, in Westminster. Everyone's like, oh, yeah, no, it is a generation-defining majority, technically. Because, I think there's that odd psychological thing because we all know they're about to lose it. So it's a bit like, But yeah, so, I mean, I think, I kind of lack sympathy a bit because if he really wanted to do stuff, he could because Labour could not stop him. And, and you would need really large Conservative rebellions as well for stuff not to pass. If you speak to backbench MPs, if you talk to kind of people who work in and around Parliament, they've not been doing a lot for the past year. And I get that, again, there was a period of time of steadying the ship, etc. But that doesn't mean they can do anything. And yet backbenchers are unbelievably bored. Like quite often the House just rises really early. It's a bit like, fine, he doesn't have that much time left. But again, if he really wanted to do stuff, he could just do it. Because there's nothing legislation-wise. If you look, there's kind of nothing going on.
I guess the only counter-argument to that is that if we believe reports that about 20 letters have already gone into the 1922 committee, he only needs to piss off another 15 people, and there's a sort of leadership election.
I don't know, but he'd win. I think he'd win obviously, it would be a massive distraction to have a confidence vote between now and the election.
It would be hilarious.
But he would win. He would obviously win, and Theresa May won hers. So I do think he is just being timid. Like there is space there for him to do stuff.
In his little Peppy video, I don't know if you saw it.
I did. It's very TikTok-y, very.
Sunak insisted, what can a country achieve in 52 weeks? Watch this space. Is there anything trailed so far that you find quite exciting? And is there anything notable by its absence?
I'm going to go heavy on the latter, I think, because actually I was not incredibly excited by anything. But I would say, I think what's missing, and even, looking at this from a Tory perspective, what's missing is virtually even just one thing hoping to win back even a single voter again, like under 45. So there's no, even stuff, so like conversion therapy, the legislation on that has been kicked into the long grass again. So that's now definitely not going to happen before the election. You've got the renters bill as well, which has been watered down and actually will probably either not achieve much or will start achieving stuff in quite a long time. So it's not going to change anything. There's nothing significant on house building, nothing significant, because obviously we did have, was it at the last budget, I think, some stuff on childcare, which is, almost certainly not going to work. There's nothing trying to bolster that, trying to help parents in any way. So I think, what's missing is even literally just the one thing, trying to make, the lives of people under 40 even vaguely more bearable. I mean, I am biased, but still.
Anyone's life more bearable, I would say. I'm trying to find the actual thing that they said about conversion therapy, because I found it sort of bitterly funny. So the line from the spokesperson was that they haven't found the right shape for the legislation yet.
It's a bit like the wrong crisis.
I mean, this is something that they announced 5 years ago.
And also, everyone agreed at the time.
Yeah.
And
they haven't found the right shape for it.
Triangle.
Seth, the polls haven't shifted in the months since he U-turned on net zero and scrapped HS2. If anything, they've gotten worse. The aggregate is back to a 20-point lead for Labour. Is this a process of attrition where we will eventually see a sudden big poll change? Or has he taken his big shot and failed?
I mean, as you've sort of already indicated, I'm much more interested in these bigger trends than looking at individual polls as they jump up and down.
Yeah.
Actually, the trend is pretty much towards stability at the moment. Even if we were to see the kinds of huge swings in support of the government that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, when people were really supporting the Tories, and that was after a landslide election, that alone wouldn't save the Conservative Party. Now, that's where they are. So I think, for example, when people are saying, could we have a hung parliament, something like that, that's for the birds. So the question right now is, are we going to have a Labour government elected by a small skin of their teeth majority or with a huge landslide? I don't think it's an achievable or winnable situation for the Tories. It's
interesting to look at the long-term trend, because what you get is basically Boris Johnson about 10, 12 points behind on average. Liz Truss 25, Rishi Sunak 20. That's basically the deficit. Yeah. And I do wonder actually sometimes to those who say, Boris Johnson could have won the next election. What would be going on with the COVID inquiry going on right now if that set of people were still in government? I think the poll rating might have been lower than Sunak's right now, genuinely. With people reading out these texts going, just let old people die.
Or was it the death squad of the Treasury? Yes. I really enjoyed that.
If you want a ballpark guess on polling, we're actually very much where the Conservatives were in 95, 96, just a year out or so from the 97 election. And so it doesn't take too much imagination to say the Tories may gain another 5%, Labour may lose another 5%. It's an election with 40% to 30%. Well, give or take 5%, that's not a bad guess.
Yeah. Tory party chair Greg Hands has been on the offensive. He's always offensive, but particularly this week against Starmer, claiming that Starmer can't enforce collective responsibility. Is that a fair criticism, and is it a wise one to bring up, considering Braverman was freelancing again this weekend by, wanting to take tents away from homeless people?
Yeah, I think, lack of discipline is a hallmark of British politics. I mean, this is really, a lot of this is down to the Israel-Palestine issue, and it's a really difficult position for any British politician. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You can take the course of taking a very strong side, and the Conservative viewpoint very much has been, as long as the Likud party is in power, they are 100% behind the government of Israel of the day. Jeremy Corbyn's position was 100% behind the Palestinian Authority. Starmer is doing something a bit more difficult, which is, rather than having entrenched supporters and opponents, trying to take a slightly more nuanced, pro-peace situation.
Which is the Blinken line, actually, isn't it? It's the sort of, we recognise your absolute right to defend yourselves, but it must be done within international law. and will try to nudge you basically away from the anger you're rightly feeling right now.
But it's a very difficult position still to hold. I mean, not least because even advocating that, people will say, oh, you're pushing for both sidesism. You're saying that both sides are as bad as each other. And that's not the line that he's pursuing. But part of this, I think, is down to, in politics, the difference between being and doing. And politicians love talking about doing. They love the emphasis on having a track record of getting things done. But actually, there's a huge amount of importance to being a sensible grown-up in the room, being somebody somebody who'll bring people together, and that's not an easy position to take.
Yeah, and what of Braverman's? Do you think it's a lifestyle choice when people live in tents?
I mean, it's leadership jockeying, and we can all see it for what it is.
I mean, I was homeless for over a year during a difficult period of my life. And I can tell you that some people do choose to be in the street, but that's only because they find the available shelters even more intolerable in terms of living conditions. So it's sort of sharing a room with, 7 other, men who make noise all night. Some people genuinely find it easier to just find a corner outside, and that's the only thing I've ever seen that makes it a choice.
We are in a country where most people are 2 or 3, not even bad decisions, just unfortunate things happening away from homelessness.
Absolutely.
And precariousness.
Because we're constantly encouraged to spend future income. Julie, both Biden and the EU are spending big on green economic plan with sizable subsidies. The UK is an outlier here, backing away from such measures. But is there actually some sense in not entering a race against 2 giants? Would we be able to ever offer the sort of subsidies to compete?
Yeah, I think there's some pragmatism and maybe not a whole lot of choice here either to some degree. I mean, I think, as your listeners know, I think the UK kind of spent all its protectionist capital a little while ago. So I don't think they want to go any deeper into that. And also, as you said, there's just the U.S. sunk over $300 billion, I think, into this plan and these subsidies. The UK just doesn't have the physical capacity to do that right now, to be able to compete in any kind of meaningful way. And I think many in the Tories and the private sector see kind of this U.S.-EU free market emerging thing as possibly best just kind of sit this one out, see what kind of technologies are going to be emerging, and make the best of what's out there instead of trying to get in this race.
Yeah, if that assumes that they never get together, right?
Indeed,
they never
yes.
go. Because there are some conversations at the moment about sort of making a EU-US joint regime on green stuff.
Yes.
And that would really be horrific for the UK, I think.
Yes, and I would say at that point they would probably find a way in. It would probably be offered a way in. My understanding from the U.S. perspective is they would be courting that as a way mostly to counter China on these, and so they would want to be building a sort of green coalition and having the UK as part of that at some point.
There is also proposed legislation that dips its toe in tech regulation. They're proposing an easing of safety around driverless vehicles, about which industry is largely happy, consumer bodies largely unhappy, and some interference with company security software updates, about which industry is very unhappy, with Meta threatening to withdraw several products. Because what they're saying is, if we have to wait on a Saturday evening for some civil servant to okay a security update that we consider critical, we would rather not offer WhatsApp rather than offer a WhatsApp with compromised security. This is seen as one of Sunak's specialist areas. So why is he getting a mixed reception? This is a bit he should be getting right.
Yeah, it does seem that way, doesn't it? And I think in some degrees he's having different emphases that I think speak to different people with some of these. I mean, for driverless vehicles, this is very entrepreneurial. It's very much speaking to that idea of let's have less regulations. But I think when it comes to tech security, I think that's something that Sunak kind of prides himself on, as we've seen this week, kind of leading on AI regulations and security, or trying to position the UK that way and things like this as well. So if you're trying to match security, tech security with also free market entrepreneurialism, those things are going to knock heads sometimes and probably please some people people and annoy other people.
Or please no one.
Or please no one. That also is an option.
Move fast and break nothing
Exactly.
seems like quite a difficult balance. Marie, we heard rumours last month that Sunak was planning to replace Jeremy Hunt with Claire Coutinho. Is there anything in this speech that sheds any light of that? Have you heard any gossip? Is Hunt being somehow squeezed out via policy?
I don't think it's about policy at all, actually. So I think part of it is that Jeremy Hunt is not he's kind of the invisible chancellor, which I find quite odd, actually. And I wrote, and I'm really not kind of slapping my own back here because I think it was a very obvious take, but about 4 months I think into the Sunak premiership, I wrote something saying, where is Jeremy Hunt? Would he like to tell us, perhaps, what kind of chancellor he is, what he plans to do? Would he, is he just, kind of being like, no, thank you? And then I think he did something like, precisely 2 interviews and then went back into the HMT bunker and was like, okay, thank you. Bye again, Jeremy.
They sort of wheel him out every time there's a set of economic data. And if it's positive, he says the plan is working. And if it's not positive, he says this proves we must stick to the plan. Yeah. And then they sort of wheel him back in. And it's like...
No, exactly. So I think, I sort of get the thing of... And also, he was appointed because Liz Truss, that's the end of the sentence.
And he was appointed by Liz Truss, importantly,
yeah, but because
wasn't
I think because she had to be like, who's the most boring but broadly reassuring person I can bring in? And then the problem is everything happened so fast after that Rishi Sunak couldn't possibly get rid of Jeremy Hunt because he'd been there for 7 minutes himself. But that was never. I think it's not an obvious kind of combination. I would personally argue not to like Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. I think you've got to have someone who's got a bit more pizzazz than the other. So we have 2 teams which are quite pizzazzless. But so I think it's mostly that. But then, so what really annoyed me, I can remember, people pointing out last week, kind of, Tory outriders, all 3 of them, saying, oh, well, that will really annoy Labour, first female chancellor, yet another thing the Labour Party won't get to have if Claire Coutinho gets it. And it's like, is that what we're doing now? Is it? Yeah. But also, and Claire, from all I've seen about her, is very clever. She's a former special advisor, has been a good MP, has been a good minister. But she's also been in Parliament
for 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
She's not been in Parliament for a very long time. And I'm not convinced. I wasn't convinced that she was necessarily ready for cabinet. So the Treasury,
I know,
Chancellor. So yeah, it just strikes me as a slightly weird move. But then Rishi, I think, and that's probably another discussion for another time. But I do think one of his problems, which every prime minister has had, I think, to an extent where he's especially bad for it, is that he only trusts, I think, very few people and is kind of obsessed with his people, the people he trusts. And that's that. And you can see that in Number 10, you can see that in Cabinet, etc. He just has his people. And Claire is one of his people. And that's that.
Seth, Sunak's off to India to catch cricket and have some trade talks, I think, later this month. There's also the autumn statement probably coming up and a reshuffle too. That's been rumoured for a while. Are voters going to notice any of it?
Nope.
Or care?
Not really.
No?
For the reasons Marie's given, Hunt really doesn't have much of a mandate to do terribly dramatic, exciting things. And we're getting to that stage in the Parliament. They don't even have the time to introduce any major legislation. So we're looking at small administrative changes and small announcements here and there, which is why we're getting all this culture war stuff coming up, because there's nothing else left in the tin. And when it comes to reshuffles, one of the problems Sunak has is he's got the John Major problem, which is you want to appoint cabinet ministers who won't upstage you, because he's quite dull. And so it's sort of, Hunt is actually the perfect chancellor.
As Marie said.
But yeah, Claire Coutinho as well, likewise. Just people who'll be there, be present, punctual. These are the virtues that he's looking for. And as for who they are, I have an obsessive anorak on these things, and I don't notice who half these people are. Now I have to pinch myself to remind myself that Oliver Dowden is our Deputy Prime Minister.
I know. It's
It's an unpleasant surprise whenever you remember, isn't it? It's oh.
But talk about pizzazzless.
No pizzazz to be found in the land.
It's interesting. I would advance another theory as well, that because every prime minister wants to appoint people who effectively don't have a huge amount of past under another prime minister because of all the changes that have happened, because of the number of prime ministers
four
we've had.
people are left.
No,
Yeah,
seriously.
no,
but
that's a really good point.
To whom do you go that is not tainted by either the Johnson era or the May era or the Truss? I don't want to call it an era, or the Truss moment.
Yeah.
To whom do you go? There really aren't that many people
and
left.
all the creeps as well.
Therese Coffey seems to
but...
survive like a cockroach from one administration to the other. Grant Shapps, but it's just those
Grant
two.
Shapps and Michael Gove will outlive us all.
Yeah.
But the response to "in space no one can hear you scream" is, in the Conservative Party, everybody has a past.
Julie, Sunak interviewed Musk.
Yes.
On X last week, and I use the term interviewed very loosely. Fangirled might be more appropriate. Why would a communications team allow the Prime Minister of one of the biggest economies in the world, a man with access to nuclear codes and a seat at the G7 table in the UN Security Council, to appear as a subordinate of a right-wing businessman?
Well, pizzazzless seems to be the word of the day today, so I think that was probably the answer. They wanted to get some buzz and excitement around this. And,
right.
I mean, and I will say...
So they see Musk as having pizzazz.
Well, I don't know we'd be talking about whoever else he spoke to. Do you know what I mean? It got us all kind of paying attention to the AI thing. And I can feel the Musk hate coming through the microphones and whatnot, but I think when everyone thinks of his politics, he is, a world-changing entrepreneur with the in the tech sector. So to have him there, with Rishi, I think was not completely ridiculous. But I think doing it on Twitter or on X was a little bit of maybe a little bit over the top. So,
but also to have him as the interviewer, that's the bit I'm really puzzled with. To have them in conversation with maybe someone else asking the questions or something like that. But to have Sunak sort of quizzing Musk for his wisdom, that's the bit that seemed weird.
Yeah, it was a curious dynamic, and I could see it playing out in a much more charismatic way, I think, with someone who was able to make it seem more like a conversation. But with Sunak, it did feel almost like he was a gumshoe reporter trying to get the scoop, and didn't quite work the way
Sir, Mr. Musk, sir.
Or just interviewing for a job. Who knows? We'll find out. Next up, time to choose our hero and villain of the week. Who is this week's gold stick and who is Black Rod? Marie.
My hero of the week is Dr. Tom Dolphin. He is the junior doctor who was part of the BMA and part of the strikes. And Lee Anderson, the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, tweeted out a Mail Online headline on Twitter, which accused him of boasting about charging the NHS for a strike cover shift, which was not true. Because I think So Tom Dolphin was not striking that day and actually donated the fee, from that shift to the BMA. And what I just really, really, really love is that, so Lee Anderson was made to apologise. Fine, but I feel like we're kind of used to that now. Most importantly, Lee Anderson was made to pay the same amount Tom Dolphin paid to the BMA.
The strike
to
fund.
the strike fund, yeah. And that made me just so happy. I just really, really enjoyed it. A nice little icing on a cake.
Yeah.
So that's my hero.
That must have been a hurtful cheque to write.
I know. It's always like 1,800 quid. It's not nothing.
That's a strong entry. Who's your villain?
My villain actually is Nadine Dorries, because we've had days now of her book is being serialised with the Mail and the Mail on Sunday, and she's like, oh well, Westminster's Parliament is such a terrible place in the Conservative Party, and this MP's a rapist, and this MP kept paedophilic content on his computer, and this and this and that, and it's a bit like, hang on. You knew all about all of this when you were a Conservative MP, including when you were, a cabinet minister, and you decided to not do anything about any of it. You decided to keep all of it so you could get a nice check from the Mail and Mail on Sunday for your serialisation, because you knew they'd only presumably buy it if you had some scoops in there. And I don't know, I feel like her tone of saying, all of this is bad, all these people are bad. I'm like, again, you knew that, and you chose to sit on that information for a long time, just so you could get it out yourself and make money out of it? I don't know, yeah. Unless there's something I'm missing, I found that incredibly tasteless.
Yeah. Seth, how about you?
My hero of the week is Guardian journalist David Conn, who is very much the epitome of the kind of dogged journalist you get, who's vindicated after they've had years of being threatened. This goes back to the Michelle Monet case. Baroness Monet, he's the one who actually broke the story on this. Her lawyers had repeated...
God, is it Monet?
Yes.
Oh, I thought it was Moan.
I always said Moan.
Okay.
Her lawyers...
love Monet. It's like Cynthia Bouquet.
Well, quite. No, her lawyers had repeatedly threatened to sue over any suggestion that she had any connection whatsoever to this PPE firm. Turns out her lawyers have now confirmed that her husband was both a major investor in and indeed chaired one of the boards in charge of procuring and supplying to the British government PPE equipment. So it turns out actually more and more of this is true and is confirmed. Raises some very serious questions to the lawyers, because they've been acting on the basis of untrue instructions, and the question as to at what stage will they have realised that will arise. Meanwhile,
if they knew about it, of course, because it's often the case that in a law firm there are Chinese walls between the commercial division and a division that might handle defamation.
And this is why I'm raising the question about at some stage it will have become apparent, whether it was yesterday or 6 months ago, we don't know. As a consequence of that, the government is currently suing her for £122 million over the PPE equipment that was provided that was faulty, and there's a National Crime investigation. There's a National Crime Agency investigation that's underway.
What about your villain?
I think they're quite interesting villains. They finally charged the 4 alleged burglars who made off with a gold toilet from Blenheim Palace 4 years ago in 2019.
Yes.
Takes a lot of chutzpah to run off with a gold laugh at 5 a.m. apparently.
Yes. Yes, chutzpah. That's the word I was looking for. Not. Okay, how about you, Julie?
Yeah, I have more of a pop culture one. We were talking before about the need for facilities breaks, and I've just learned that there's a cinema chain in the UK called View Cinemas that has reintroduced the intermission. So as someone who always needs bathroom break and always needs snack break, I am a huge fan of this.
This is massively exciting news to me.
So yeah, I'm sure there's a commercial reason for it, but for me and my loving my breaks, I'm very much in support of this. Bring back the intermission.
Oh, maybe they'll bring back the sort of the intermission music as well, because loads of yes, that would be very exciting.
Sir Martin Scorsese recently threatened with legal action or his film company.
Because it's very controversial, I guess, for filmmakers to cut a movie in half, and I can see that artistically to not break the flow of it in a cinema. But other directors are starting to think about actually they use it to actually plan the movie like that. So it's almost 2 acts with a set intermission. Yeah. I think Tarantino did that back at some point. But there's a kind of
yes, you're right.
An indie
Do you know The Hateful Eight?
Exactly.
Has an interlude in the middle with a sort of nicely photographed mountain range, which was very in keeping with her style. Okay, and who's your villain?
So again, a rather mundane one, but speaking of the burglars, someone stole my socks out of my shoes when I was swimming the other day. So I know it's a very small transgression, and I'm glad they left the shoes. But I just had to laugh at it. It was just such a funny little crime, and I just hope my socks are out there having their best life as sock puppets or something. So, but whoever this petty thief is at the YMCA,
I kind of felt stealing one sock would have been funnier.
That is true. Yes, they could have done that or replaced them.
Okay, so I have to make my decision. It's not an easy one today. I have to say a lot of worthwhile, but I have to give it to Tom Dolphin. I do. I really,
it's so funny.
Because just forcing that apology and that payment out of Lee Anderson, it's just very, very, very funny. and greatly appreciated. Although View Cinemas introducing breaks is life-changing information. And then I think for villain, I have to give it to Julie's Sock Thieves.
Yes.
Because because it's those daily paper cats that reduce us to barbarians.
This would never have happened to Albert Einstein. He refused to wear socks, ever.
Hey, maybe that's why.
So if you're out there and you happen to be listening, it's never too late to send them back.
That's right.
Wash them first.
Yes, I won't have you pay the difference like the other guys do.
In exactly 364 days' time, as we record, the polls will open in the US presidential election. Joe Biden's approval rating is just 15%. Sky high by British standards, where everyone is negative, compared to Donald Trump's 14%. The numerous criminal indictments, allies and lawyers deserting him, and his own children forced to testify against him has done nothing to shift Trump's base, still smarting from what they view as Biden's fraudulent presidency. Julie, so a year out from the vote, do you have a sense of how Americans are feeling on either side, just about the prospect of this thing coming up?
Yeah, honestly, pretty despondent. I mean, no matter what side Americans are on, the majority are disappointed by this, and polls have shown this, that Democrats and Republicans alike are not looking forward to this rematch. For Biden, he just continues to kind of bleed support, even from his own party. And Trump, as we know, he's a known quantity, and there's going to be a lot more revealed. But that just hasn't changed him keeping the base. But there's a lot of Republicans who would like to see someone different. And I think it's just going to be a pretty grim 12 months. And this may be one election where we see turnout drop just because there's a lot of frustration, I think, with both candidates.
Do you have a sense of whom that might favor?
Right now, it's looking like Trump has a bit of an edge, and I think this will jockey back and forth over the next 12 months. The latest polls we've seen is that he's actually pulling ahead of Biden a little bit, but again, that might move. But there's just some intangibles that won't change. I mean, Biden's age continues to be probably his biggest liability, and that's not going to change or move in the right direction for him.
It's going to move the wrong way.
And Trump obviously his situation will change as the trials start and more comes out. But I feel like while many are counting on that as dropping him back, I think if anything, it might accelerate him among some of his voters and supporters. That'd almost be his campaign.
As we were saying, Trump is about to take the stand for the first time, as we record actually, in one of the many legal battles he's facing. How important have they been in reviving his popularity, but also could they develop in a way that has the opposite effect? Or is it just baked in now that the more he gets into trouble, the more his supporters will love him?
Yeah, I think the question is if there's kind of a max point of his supporters, because obviously his base is going to be with him regardless. The trials are just going to increase their enthusiasm. But the question as to if he can win over, say, independents, moderates, those really crucial votes in U.S. politics for swing states as these trials get underway and as, some at least get a bit more averse to him. But again, we haven't seen that dynamic happening. And I think one thing we've learned with Trump is for 8 years now, we keep saying, oh, well, once everyone sees this, then they'll come to their senses. Yes. And that just has never happened. And it's not like there's some big reveal that we're all waiting for. Like, all of this is way out in the open. We all saw January 6th. We've all seen the documents. Like,
this is literally my next question.
To come out.
Absolutely. My next question, and I read it here. Why do you think events on the 6th of January just did not have the profound effect that everyone thought they would have? And analysts, even on the right of politics, thought this is some kind of milestone, some kind of turning point, and it just not.
Yeah, it's such a good question because I think so many of us were very confused by that. And I think the main reason I can say is that the majority of Republican voters agreed with Trump that he lost the election. And so the fact that there was months of him saying that and then a big rally around that was not problematic to them. They maybe disagreed with the violence, some of the actions that they saw as some bad apples, some rogue actors, but didn't put that firmly on Trump or on Republicans at large. And so once the impeachment trial started and the other trials indictments started, it was this seen as, it's seen as a witch hunt. And I think Trump just very savvily just took control of that narrative and was able to convince about half the country that he was a victim in all of this rather than a villain.
Seth, how important is the age of the candidates? As Julie mentioned, Biden will already break Reagan's record this term, and if elected for a second term, would be older than even Gladstone by the end of his second term. But we are all living longer and healthier lives, so you would expect these ages to go up. Is age a fair thing to bring up?
I think health is a fair thing to bring up. And obviously, increasing infirmity with age is a factor. So there is a legitimate public interest in that. It's not a crude measurement by age simply because you get very healthy and very unhealthy people of different ages. I should point out John F. Kennedy was he was the youngest president elected to the presidency, and his health was abysmal. I mean, he was on uppers and downers from various doctors at the time and literally flat on his back for parts of his presidency in pain. And it's interesting that Trump actually was the oldest president after Reagan. So he exceeded Reagan's record. In fact, Trump and Hillary Clinton both would have exceeded Ronald Reagan's record.
76 or something?
Reagan was 69 when he was elected. And
But by the time he left, I think.
Yeah, he was a few months shy of 77.
Yeah.
So, that's right. And, Joe Biden has certainly broken that record. Biden is certainly slowing down. I think people who've watched Biden around for the last 40, 50 years in Congress are pretty much reconciled to that. On the other hand, I'm a big fan of Biden's administration, I have to say. I think Biden has been one of the most proactive and consequential presidents in terms of getting his legislation through, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with it. Joe Biden is up there with Ronald Reagan, you could argue. He's certainly up there with Barack Obama in his first term, not his second term, possibly even exceeds it in terms of achievements. And so part of this then goes to that classic question of deflection that you get when somebody asks, well, are you judging their administration or are you judging them personally?
Yes.
And in this environment, the vice president really starts to matter. Having a healthy vice president who could step in if required. Remember that the 17th Amendment, I think it is, it's not just the death, it's the incapacity of the president is the issue. And it may well be that a president gets to a certain age or a certain level of infirmity and says, I'm willing to retire, mid-term, and that's not the end of the world. The question is, are they ready to set up an administration around them to do that? And actually, Donald Trump was advancing a lot of these arguments. Questions about his age were being asked.
I mean, it is interesting because I agree with you to a certain extent that for all his faux pas when he's talking off script and stuff like that, in terms of policy choices, I cannot think of something that Biden has done that I thought that you put your foot wrong on that one, actually. In terms of the policy choices he's made.
There are a couple of missteps around Afghanistan, but by and large, he's been really effective. Yeah.
Solid, really solid, and which is kind of the opposite of Trump, because Trump, for all his confidence in the pronouncements, the policy slate behind them was a disaster that he sort of vacillated wildly on practically every subject, domestic or foreign. Julie, Americans famously vote with their pocketbook. The US is dealing with cost of living issues similar to the UK and other Western economies, but the economic indicators for the US are notably better. Like, they are recovering visibly faster. And yet the economy is where Biden is trailing Trump in every single opinion poll. Why is there this seeming disconnect between how people think Biden is doing and how he is actually doing?
Yeah, it's so true. And to some of what we were just saying, like some of his policies have actually been quite notable, and unemployment is at one of its lowest rates in years. And as you noted, inflation is coming down and certainly looks better than it does on this side of the pond and whatnot. But the perception does matter for a lot of people, and a lot of people are still feeling that crunch of inflation. They still feel it in their pocketbooks. They still see prices going up. So even though those of us kind of comparing UK, US are like, what are they complaining about? Like, someone who's just seeing prices go up still thinks, okay, this isn't good. And I think moreover, again, Trump really commanded that narrative that he ran a good economy. He has pitched himself as this businessman who knows what he's doing, that, keeps taxes low, gives like tax cuts, these kinds of things. So I think a lot of Americans, that appeals to them, even those who are not MAGA and not caught up in the whole Trumpy part of Trump, will vote on the economy and what they perceive to be a more capable Trump in terms of his dealing with that.
So if what we see in the figures begins to filter through to people's finances, you might see quite a quick turnaround. Is that?
I think a bit, yes. Yeah. And I imagine a lot of, like most elections, and it seems trite to say this now, but it does often come down to how the economy is doing at that time. Yeah. And I do think that will make a big difference in this election, especially in those swing states where it's a lot of states where, the old industries and jobs have left. It's places where people have felt a lot of the economic crunch and kind of this globalization kind of time. So how those specific states are feeling or seeing things, I think will make a big difference.
And is it, in your experience, something on which the dice cast quite early? So we're seeing today actually a poll that has Trump ahead in 5 of the 6 battleground states. A year away from the election, is that quite solid, or has it in the past been reversed quite easily in that last year?
Oh, it's absolutely been reversed in the past. Obama, I think, was down 8 points around this time before his second election, and then obviously won that quite handily. But I guess this election, it is unlike anyone we've seen before in that we know both of these individuals and know them both as president. So there's not this sense of, is there going to be something that comes out about Trump over the next while or something like that. Like it'll be almost a referendum on Trump.
Something else.
Yeah, something else. It's just, we know them. We know how they govern. We know all the scandals and baggage that we assume can be like unearthed by this point. So I don't think there'll be quite as much movement as some years, but world events, country events, the economy, all that will always shift the numbers in some way.
Marie, there was a general sense in 2020 that sanity had prevailed and the Biden victory would start a sort of wave of more conventional politics, at least around the world. And what is becoming clear now is that the populist right is not a beast that we can vanquish just once. It's a sort of Mike Myers of politics. It will get up again and again.
Here I am saying Frenchly to you, really? We'd not noticed in France at all.
No, but do progressives need to change their tactics? Do we need to see more of what's happening in Poland, for example, of these coalitions of people with slightly different agendas that are saying, okay, first things first, not that?
Oh, God, I think it's a really complicated question, and I'm not sure
that's why I asked it to you. You're very clever.
Thank you. But the problem is, I think I'm not sure I have a set answer, because I'm not sure there is a set answer. In that, I think in some countries, obviously, what does work, I think, is having that quite broad electoral coalition. But then in others, again, taking the example of France, I think that, doing that, we did that in France several times, of saying actually in the second round when either Le Pen, father or daughter, ended up there of saying actually, wherever else you stand, on the kind of political spectrum, you've just got to vote for the other one. Is it really working? Le Pen is still at the door now. And she's still, and then that's not really worked. And, we've now had obviously 2 terms of Macron, and that's not really helped meaningfully. And I think she will almost certainly make the second round again this time. So I think, again, a coalition may work in some places, may not work in others. I
mean, do we mind Le Pen being runner-up forever?
Yeah, kind of.
Well, I mean, provided she never makes it to number 1.
Well, will she never make it to number 1?
I don't know. That's what I'm asking. I'm saying provided that it prevents her from getting to number 1.
Nah. I'm not.
It's quite a
convinced.
high stakes game, isn't it?
It's also a bit like, and I feel like you don't need to be a socialist to think that, the only two available options being the centre right or the hard right are not, that's not an ideal state of affairs. I think that's, many people have other opinions. But yeah, and as I was saying, I think I also have some sympathy for, some of the left wingers who say actually, politics as usual is not working. What you need is a radical government, that kind of changes material conditions in a way that really matters, especially to the working class, etc. But, would that work everywhere? I'm not sure. So I think that I think that narratively speaking, it is quite easy to say, OK, populism is going up everywhere. And I think that you can probably find some reasons why it's going on in lots of different countries at the same time. So, the economy obviously having taken a massive hit around the pandemic. You've got, I think, the internet more broadly, and that's a whole different chat. But I think that's kind of changed politics in a really fundamental way on national level kind of everywhere. But at the same time, I think how you respond to that populism changes country by country and election by election, I think. So that's a very long way of saying it probably depends on the country and on the election and the type of populism you're fighting as well.
Bernie Sanders upset quite a lot of the UK left by coming out with basically Starmer's line yesterday that a ceasefire is impossible at this point. Humanitarian pauses are essential, that Israel has an absolute right to defend itself, but it must do so within the limits of international law. Does this put an end to the idea that Sanders is sort of American Corbyn or vice versa? Do we tend to read across too much, basically, from politics in the States to politics here and try to find proxies, just to make them slightly more understandable to us?
Yes and no. So I think I always enjoyed, annoyingly, I can't remember who it is. If you're listening, do tell me, because I know I'm stealing your gag here. But yeah, like a mate once said, Bernie Sanders in the UK would be a Liberal Democrat. Like he's just not he's not that left wing by European standards. Like he is left wing by American standards, but not by ours. And I can't not think about it whenever I see him. So I think there's that thing where actually American politics, even pre-Trump, was always, I think, further to the right on lots of issues naturally than British politics, French politics, etc. So that's that thing. But the other side, I think, is you can probably say that he is the American Corbyn in the sense that by American standards he is left wing and and he is to the left of a lot of the Democrats, etc. So I basically think those comparisons work as long as you always make sure to keep them in context. So in the same way that I can be a 9 out of 10 in Westminster, if I go out with my fashion industry friends, I am suddenly a 6 out of 10. It's just context is everything.
Seth, you recently travelled around the States, didn't you? You were doing a sort of mini tour. Politically speaking, what struck you? What jumped out at you?
I spent most of my time quite deliberately talking to conservative Republicans because I speak to Liberal Democrats all the time. I mean, we're in sort of constant dialogue and I'm, in the echo chamber, as it were. But I was really quite keen to just understand where conservative Republicans are coming from right now, what they're feeling. And certainly there was a strong skewing to their sort of being establishment Republicans I was speaking to. And the reason I mention that is the widespread degree to which they openly say Donald Trump is batshit. We know he's a problem. We know he's a loser. We know he loses elections for us and is a calamity and is insanity for the Republican Party. And because we're conservatives, because we're party-minded, we do not want Donald Trump. But we are never saying a word of that out in public. It is the big taboo at all costs to confront that publicly. And it's one of these problems where they are so afraid of their base, they are so afraid of their own voters. It is the logical consequence of populism, the degree to which you rile up the mob, but then become a slave to that mob.
Control to it. Yeah. Julie, this sets me up perfectly for my final question to you, because another thing that is emerging from all the polling is that most Americans would actually prefer neither Trump nor Biden. Most named Democrat candidates do better than Biden. Incredibly, an unnamed generic Democrat candidate does better than anyone. Sort of like, just an imagined Democrat is plus 9 points on the latest polls. Is this not a clue for both parties to maybe rethink the person they're putting forward?
Well, there's certainly a lot of rumblings, and I would agree with Seth. I think many Republicans wish there was someone other than Trump and thought there would be, but just the polls just show it's not going to be that way for them. For the Democrats, I think there are some more vocal expressions that maybe Biden needs to rethink this. I don't see him doing that. The new polls that are out that do show this like unnamed candidate excelling, I think are interesting. But in reality, though, I think when people usually see who are some of the options, that doesn't usually right, and I think Biden knows that also. That was one of the challenges. People referred to the vice president before. There is not really a clear person to know who to pass the baton to. That's not saying that the Democrats don't have a bench. They do, but that idea of trying to coalesce enough people from the left, from the center, all these things, the way Biden was able to do, I do think it would be tricky for a newcomer to be able to do that, whether it's Gavin Newsom or, Gretchen Whitmer. There's lots of names that are thrown out, some who I think will probably be very strong candidates the next time around. I think, especially this late in the game, that would be challenging, especially against a candidate like Trump. I mean, he is just going to go for the jugular for whoever it is.
So you don't think that because of there's a slight time disconnect, isn't there, between the Republican primaries, which begin and end slightly before the Democrat ones. You don't think they're setting some kind of some kind of trap, so that the Republicans are basically committed to Trump, and then at the last minute, Biden goes, "Look, I'm getting on a bit. I'm going to leave the field to someone younger and more dynamic."
Yeah, if he was going to do that, he will, I think, need to do it by the end of the calendar year, just for
by the end of this year.
Yes, for anyone else to be able to get on the ballots, to fundraise, to get a campaign together. It would be setting that person up for a very difficult road ahead against Trump if he waits much longer.
So what do you think are the possible surprises that might append the coming election? I mean, what are there scenarios out there where you think if Trump goes to prison for the Georgia thing that he can't pardon himself for, or Biden might be taken ill, or Trump might be taken ill?
Yeah, I think both of those. If we're looking at polls, I think we can assume both of them will be candidates. But health-wise, I think either one of them could maybe not be. But that would be one black swan kind of thing. Obviously, if Trump is actually convicted and actually is behind bars, I think that would make a difference. But I don't see that as particularly likely, given all the legal challenges. The main wild cards, I think, will be third parties and third candidates. So we were expecting a couple different individuals as well as groups to be throwing their hats into the ring. Some already have. And I think with the U.S. elections so close and those states that are the swing states coming down to often just, in the thousands of votes, if you
even
have third
taking a couple of points,
exactly, that is going to be huge. So there's a group called No Labels that might field a candidate. Robert Kennedy Jr. is polling about 19% right now, which is quite strong for him, pulling both left and right-wing voters. So there's a lot of unknowns going into 2024.
We've reached the end of the show, so it's time for escape routes. What bookshops, DIY stores or streaming services are we emptying our wallets into this week? Seth?
I think it's very unfortunate that for the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who, the BBC has uploaded almost the entire 60-year back catalogue of Doctor Who episodes to iPlayer, because I have much less free time now.
So that's your recommendation, I take it.
It's the good, the bad and the ugly.
Pointing newbie to an old-style episode that will get them hooked into the series.
Spearhead from Space.
Okay, very good. Marie, what?
Oh, God.
You look pained at the idea of Spearhead from Space.
No,
I'm very fond of, because my ex used to watch Doctor Who old episodes on UK Gold assiduously every Sunday morning. And
Alex, you got the wrong end of the stick here from my pained face. I too am rewatching Doctor Who.
All right. So Pyramids from Mars is one I enjoyed.
So which
The
one?
Pyramids of Mars
That is a good one.
one I
That's a very good
enjoyed.
one.
And there was another one with the lighthouse. and a sort
Horror
of alien...
of Fang Rock.
Yes, with a sort of alien craft that looked like a kitchen knife flying through.
From the Gothic period
which
of Tom
probably
Baker.
was a kitchen knife.
I'm rewatching Matt Smith era. He was my favourite Doctor.
Oh,
yeah.
you're so young. It's awful.
He looks like a sexy foot.
Okay, so what's your escape route?
Well, it was kind of going to be that. But I mean, I'm going to be honest, I get quite bad seasonal depression. So I think I'm at the moment kind of just watching Doctor Who and staring into my sad lamp like I'm a big moth.
Yeah.
And that's kind of all I'm up to, really.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's good. How about you, Julie?
Yes, so I was convinced by friends to go see Guys and Dolls at the Bridge Theatre, and I'm sure most of your hardened listeners are not big musical fans, and my gang usually is not either. But I will say, if you just want a very different kind of theatre experience, check this out. It's an immersive audience, so you are standing in the arena stage with the actors, and you are suddenly like walking down the street in New York City with the actions playing out around you, then in a nightclub, then in a ticker tape parade, and it ends with a big dance party, and you're just a part of the play, and I've never seen anything staged like this with buildings rising out of the ground next to you. It's just it's really fantastic the way they do this. I never expected Guys and Dolls to be such an experience. So I recommend. It really
sounds very exciting.
Yeah, they did a very good job.
So I was going to recommend the latest series of Upload, simply because I'm very fond of it. It has good heart. It's sort of warm and fluffy. It's by the people who did Parks and Rec, and it kind of has that same vibe to it, you know, that people are basically generally nice, which I kind of need in my life right now. But at the very last minute, I have to say, I read the IEA report on Brexit. So I'm going to recommend that as the most terrific piece of fiction that I have read this year. And that's the end of the Tuesday edition of Oh God, What Now? Thank you, Marie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you very much.
And many thanks to our guest, Julie Norman.
Thank you so much.
Oh God, What Now? We'll be back on Friday or Thursday if you're a Patreon backer. Thanks for listening to Oh God, What Now? See you next time. Thank you.